Hello, welcome to the Two Grumpy Old Men podcast. I'm Tim Bagwell, and with me is
Rich Garling.
Rich. What are we talking about this week?
Well, I think the big topic on everybody's mind is the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Okay, and that bill is currently before the U.S. Senate, as we know, Nat, and it includes a lot of different provisions that could significantly impact the balance of power, between the executive and the judicial branches, and when you get down to it, even the congressional branches, and that's not good. That's not good at all. And as you know, I've been writing some Substack articles, on this particular topic.
Yes, I read that
Uh,
this week.
yeah, well, and the one I've been concentrating on mostly has been Section 70302, which basically, in a nutshell, tells the judiciary that they can't review anything. Well, then what's the
Right,
point of what's the point of having the judiciary? And so that's a problem, and that because it could make it more difficult for courts to enforce their rulings. And that.
but what confuses me about their silly, I want to use the word ass here, approach here is that wouldn't a law firm or an activist or the Democratic Party just bring a case before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court would knock that provision down? I would think. I don't know what the standing has to be.
Well, no, here's the thing. See, Congress does have the power by the Constitution to be able to decide what cases or what types of cases the Supreme Court can hear. Now, traditionally, they've kept the hands-off thing. See, they got the right to organize the Supreme Court. So, in other words, how many total justices are they going to have? Okay, because remember how we've gone through this a number of different times where they've changed the size of the judiciary or the Supreme Court over the years. That since we became a country, FDR wanted to pack the court, and he caught all kinds of hell for that. They've talked about it recently about packing the court because of the fact that it's out of balance right now. Where we have more conservatives than we have liberals on the court. So that's one area that Congress can determine, what the court size is going to be and what kind of cases it's going to hear. So in this case, it's perfectly legitimate for them to be able to do this, but I don't think it's right to hide it in the middle of a bill. This section 70302 is just one paragraph in the middle of a 1,000-page bill.
Right.
Okay, and there's other things that are hidden in this 1,000-page bill, that are not they're not going to be very nice to us, and it
Right.
just drives you nuts. And
Kind of a sneaky, the kind of sneaky legislation, the kind of sneaky power grabs that we've almost become accustomed to. It's almost normalized, unfortunately.
yes, yes. Well, hey, the Democrats are just as guilty of doing this as the Republicans are. And where things are snuck in. When they talk about pork barrel, for instance. Now, mind you, that's money going to be spent, and it should be in a budget bill, but it's snuck in at the last minute. So all of a sudden, somebody down in Mississippi wants to have a bridge built, okay, and they want the feds to pay for it. So they sneak it into a budget bill, and bing. Illinois is certainly guilty of pork barrel spending. I think sometimes Illinois is the king of it in that, because, quite honestly, here in Illinois, we've got the best politicians money can buy.
Yes.
And
Yes.
but see,
Well,
in Illinois, we're
I
not afraid
recall
to send them to prison either.
I recall the long past columnist, Chicago columnist Mike Royko,
Hmm.
saying that in Latin, I can't remember what the Latin phrase was, but the motto of Chicago should be "I got mine."
Exactly, exactly, and that's what happens. That's what happens. And it's just amazing. It's just amazing.
It's
Uh,
amazing. It's interesting you mentioned that. This is a little bit of an historical aside, but one of the things that happened during the Great Depression was that Illinois kind of helped. Illinois went for Roosevelt more than anything else, but our governor, who won at that time, we were on the cycle with the presidency at that time. That didn't change until the 70s. And I say we when I was from Illinois originally, though I'm in Missouri now. And the we had more representatives in Congress. We were had I think 30 some representatives. So Illinois got some money out of was the largest recipient. It was also took the hardest hit in the Depression about any state. And then with not Altgeld, I'm trying to remember his name, but the guy Horner, Governor Horner,
Uh-huh.
had more votes for him than Roosevelt did, and that Roosevelt overwhelmingly carried the state, but Horner helped with that, and Horner made sure that lots of money came to Illinois to
Uh-huh.
help build the system, to help rebuild the state.
Hmm.
But yeah, I understand we're sneaking the stuff in, and but not hardly ever the power grab like this is. The power grab that this represents. Democrats go for the money, but the power grabs not so much.
Right.
Though they may learn from this.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, we'll see. Now, here's the other thing too. Uh, uh, just real quick on that one section 70302. The impact really on the judicial authority is that one, it weakens court enforcement, so they can make a decision they can't enforce. So what's the point? And that it defunds enforcement of contempt citations, meaning the courts may struggle to compel compliance with their rulings. Retroactive application. This was an interesting one.
Uh,
In that the provision applies to past contempt orders, potentially nullifying existing judicial provisions. So if the court said that the EPA was correct on a certain type of enforcement when it came to pollution, well, if the EPA decides that they want to ignore it, the court can't do a thing about it. If any
right.
company out there chooses to ignore it, the court can't do
Yeah.
a thing about it. All right, and there's a bond requirement for the plaintiff. So basically, in a
All
nutshell,
right.
you got to come up with a bond. Okay, but here's the interesting thing about the bond that I found was that, yeah, sure, you know, Congress could require a bond, and the court could turn around and go, the bond, $1.
Ah,
It's a bond, you know, and then they could try to go after them for contempt of court and things like that, But then, in the end, that's playing a silly game, really, when you get down to it.
right.
So, and that they say that let's see, historically, and sorry, I'm looking at some notes over here, but civil rights cases, there's over 130 school desegregation orders that could become unenforceable. And it could affect ongoing civil rights litigation as it is. Immigration
Yeah.
enforcement. A federal judge recently halted the transfer of migrants to an El Salvador prison without due process. Well, that's another topic I'm going to be having on my Substack page is talking about due process. It
Right.
says this basically could prevent the courts from holding the officials accountable for ignoring their rulings. And then regulatory oversight, of course. And you'll notice in the recent case before the appeals court in San Francisco, in which Governor Newsom brought a suit concerning the federalization of the National Guard in California, saying that
Right.
basically, one, there was no real reason to federalize them like Trump did. Well, a lower court said you're correct. He should not have been able to do that. The appeals court put that lower court decision on hold while they listened or heard the arguments for and against it. And then they decided that, well, for now, until the full appeals court can hear it, they're going to allow Trump to do what he's doing. Trump's argument is that the court has no right to oversee or do any kind of oversight of the executive department, which, by the way, is the very same thing that's happening with this Section 70302. They're going to,
Yes.
right,
Yes.
and that is so.
So,
He not only wants Congress to agree with it, he wants the federal court to say it's, that they don't have the right to oversee it, which,
all right.
if all the way, since the Chief Justice Marshall decided back in the early 1800s,
Yep.
we've got a right. The court has the right. In fact, they have the duty to oversee.
Well, exactly. And Holmes later, Oliver Rowland Holmes later echoes that with a law. His stern position was a law doesn't become a law until a judge has said it is. You can pass laws and that may never even be applied. That's possible. You pass a law and it never comes up. And it may
Well,
be rare, but it's
it may never come up before the court.
right, right, and it's not really the established law as far as the Holmes was concerned until it was heard by the court and decided upon by the court.
Yeah.
Now this topples that a bit.
Well, here's the
And
thing,
that's
though.
what they want to do.
I can't agree with Holmes, necessarily on that because
Oh,
there's so
yeah,
many laws that are passed that never go before the court. Okay, and it's a law,
right,
and
right.
it's a
Well,
law
and that's the
nonetheless.
and it's kind of the it's until it's interpreted by the court, so it's completed the full cycle.
Hmm.
But yeah, many of them, most will not become. They're just out there. They're past. I guess you might call them past legislation with the title of law attached to them. But
Exactly.
they don't become until someone challenges, until it becomes an issue. It's not the official law until the courts have had their say. But it's a slippery slope. But the of interpretation.
Yep.
But this power grab. Well, yeah, and I think it's part of Project 2025. Really, they want a full birth or girth or whatever it is to be able to do what they want to do. With restructuring the society, so that we have to do a prayer and a pledge of allegiance before each podcast.
But Jim, this is not the first time in our history that this type of executive power grab has gone on. And that, let me give you some examples. I mean, the biggest one everybody knows about, of course. Excuse me, I'm presuming that everybody listened in history classes, but was Abraham Lincoln and habeas corpus,
Sure.
and that, in which he had some Confederate spies in prison, and the court said he had to release them and bring them before the court, and he basically told the court, "You enforce it," and then of course the court has no real true means of enforcing their decisions, and that in fact this whole thing with the Constitution gets
They
down
do have the
to,
federal marshals.
hmm?
They do have the federal
Well,
marshals.
yeah, but who runs the federal marshals?
Well, yeah, that too. But for
So
the
you get
most
down to
part,
it, they really don't have the means.
for the most part, well, I don't think he had a very large federal marshal service at that time, but it's larger now. But between the federal marshals have been good at enforcing the judge's orders, but they're usually not so broadly. That's the go and retrieve someone
Yeah. Yes.
or
You
cease
know.
and desist them.
Well,
Right.
the whole. You get down to it, the whole system has to run on everybody accepting that this is the rule. These are the rules. This is how we're going
Right.
to do this. And when somebody decides that they no longer want to accept it, and in particular if they happen to be president of the United States, then we got a problem.
Yeah. Well, what's happening, and we keep going back historically, and it goes back to some fundamentals beyond just the Constitution. It goes back to the concept of the social contract.
Yeah.
This is the social contract that is developed. That there is a balance among the three branches of government, and that there's an expectation of relative fairness.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Things priorities shift by from over historically from administration to administration, from Congress to Congress, and from Supreme Court to Supreme Court. But these things shift around. But there's been that understanding that they'll be shifting around, and that there'll be a certain balance and an expectation, if not fairness for me now, fairness for me later.
Hmm.
Or for my people later. There'll be a fairness. Fairness is coming.
Well, but isn't that the neat thing about it? Is that the system's been set up so that it can be changed, and that change may go back and forth.
Yeah.
Okay, and
Right.
that's okay. So long as the basic structure of it doesn't change, overall,
Exactly.
or as you know, it's really tough to change that basic structure because of the fact that the only way you can change it is through amendments to the Constitution, and it's not easy to pass an amendment to the
Well,
Constitution,
yeah,
and
exactly,
that's done on
exactly.
purpose. That's
Right,
that's done on
right.
purpose.
Yeah, and now they're trying to do away with that in essence, and that raises the question: once you break the social contract, forms the foundation of the Constitution, and you break the Constitution, at what point are we in a coup d'état? At what point are we in a revolutionary state?
Yeah.
That seems given the way everything is normalized, those two questions seem superfluous or silly to some people.
Yeah.
But that's kind of not, because if this 70302 you said,
70302. Yeah.
yeah, if that passes, uh, yeah, that's kind of nuts.
Yeah.
Hopefully, the Senate would not would pull that out.
Right.
There
That's the
there
hope.
seems to be members of the Senate who, on the Republican side, because that's what we're concerned about here,
Well, there's
who
there's
would vote
there's
against
two
it.
things that could happen here. Two things that could happen here. First off, is if the senators, get their heads straight, all right, and pull it out of there. We're not going to consider this. Okay. Second thing is that the uh, is it sergeant at arms or the um, oh God, now I can't think of the guy who uh, uh, he basically takes a look at a bill. Now, all bills have to fit a certain. So if it's a budget bill, they can only have budget items in the bill.
Right.
Okay. The
This is not a
parliamentarian,
budget item.
parliamentarian. That's who I'm thinking of. That's
All
what I'm
right. Right.
thinking of. All right. So the parliamentarian takes a look at it and he says, "Okay, this is a budget bill. It can only have budgetary things in it." So he starts picking through the bill and tossing out things that don't concern the budget. Well, guess what? Section 70302 does not concern the budget. It's not a budgetary matter. So he can pull it out, but the Republicans can override what he says, okay, and put it back in. Now it's going to be up.
Yeah.
Now it's going to be up to the senators, to say, no, we don't want that in the bill. Okay, kind of thing. So, and it only takes a simple majority vote right now, to
Right.
decide that. So
Right.
that's pretty much
Right.
where that's
Right.
at.
So we're kind of like depending on the Senate right now to save democracy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
essence, and that's
Now, and hopefully, I think Rand Paul may be one of the senators. I was
hmm
good to see him do something on the side of democracy. Actually, it's amazing how these guys don't look as bad in context.
hmm and
And I think Murkowski and the Republican women may also come over uh, to that point of view.
yeah, I wouldn't
I don't know
expect
about any
anything.
Republican.
I wouldn't expect anything from Susan Collins.
Who knows about Susan Collins? She just,
God.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
still I still wonder if Donald
Or
Trump has
Joni
learned his lesson.
Ernst.
Yeah, Joni Ernst. There's another one for you. Well, let him die. Let him die. What the hell? Yeah, who cares? And then wondering, I really would love to just go up to Susan Collins and go, well, do you think he's learned his lesson yet?
Oh yes, yes, yes. Every lesson. It's a learning job, training.
Yeah.
And speaking of, with this bill, also giving this would be giving this power over to a man who looks like uh, uh, he's further and further towards dementia.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
bizarre,
That's what people are
bizarre,
saying.
bizarre stuff.
But something. Yeah. He may. That just makes him more of an asshole. Sorry for my language. People talk about his mental state and all this sort of stuff, and
Uh-huh.
everything. They call him a narcissist, which he could be, and all that sort of stuff. But it gets down to he's an a-hole, and he knows it, and he doesn't care, And that. Now here's the thing
Uh-huh.
too. You were mentioning earlier about are we in a constitutional crisis? Are we in a coup d'état? Or what have you, and all that. And quite honestly, right now, no, I don't think so. And you know
Right.
why? And you know why? We would not be allowed to do what we are doing right now.
Well, here's the thing
you know,
about that.
and he's not
Because
going to be able to control that.
they've been attempting the coup for about what are we at 4 or 5 months now?
Yeah,
Let's see. Yeah, yeah. So we've been in an attempted coup, and I was at first I had my Jenga model, which was two Jenga towers intertwined, and eventually something would be pulled out.
So what's a
Better
Ginga
down
tower?
here, huh?
What's a
Jenga,
Jenga? Yeah, what is that?
Jenga, the game Jenga.
Okay.
The stacked blocks. You pull each one of them out, and when you pull one out and it falls, you lose.
Very good.
right? The
Okay.
idea is to pull as many blocks out
Yeah. I just
without the
want to
thing
make sure
falling down.
everybody who's listening to this understands what that may be. Look at me. I didn't even know what it was.
What country are you from?
Ooh,
What country are
yeah.
you? Any rate, two intertwined Jenga towers from the game Jenga with the blocks, removable blocks, but usually it's just one Jenga tower. If you got two, for instance, the administrative state and then the assault on the, if you pull one of those, or the American, I was going to say the American economy and the administrative state, pull, as a Jenga tower, two blocks, which one of the things that gets removed causes it all to fall down? Was my original model. But they removed so many of these things that I've come to the conclusion what we have here is that we are an immense economy and we are an immense state.
Right.
And these guys have been, with their funny chainsaw props and with, with their craziness, have been, in fact, I would say, with the exception of this 70302, have been just isolated somewhat in the effect of what they've been trying to do. They have not destroyed the state and they have not destroyed the economy, but they have certainly disrupted the state and disrupted the economy,
Right.
but not to the extent that it doesn't come back and bite them in the ass in the long run. Because they don't have enough time to do everything they want to do, and they don't have the staff. They are not staffed like an autocracy. They're not staffed by people who know how to run the government at least the way they think they should run a government under an autocracy.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're finding out that they're disagreeing with each other over how to do all of that. For the few people that they have. I mean, when you sit there and you see that idiot Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Getz, Tom Getz, and who else? Matt Getz, excuse me, not Tom Getz, Matt
Yeah.
Getz, and Hannity, and a few others.
Cruz. That's not
Who?
Cruz. Cruz.
Yeah, Tom. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Cruz is who was it? He had the interview with.
Carl. It was Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, Tucker. Yeah,
Yeah.
good old Tucker.
Yeah.
And got it. And
Yeah.
hate to say it, but Tucker probably could, pretty much, that had to be easy
Tucker
pickings.
Yeah, well, we haven't even talked about the Iran situation and the,
No,
you
no,
know,
that's a topic all of
thousands of
itself.
years. Just on the side here, just have to say it. This thousands of years, no one has conquered that's conquered that territory.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
and you just need to look at the map and you see rolling mountains after mountains after mountains, rolling, rolling, rolling. You're not going through there.
No.
You're not going through there
Well,
successfully.
Afghanistan should have been a lesson for that.
Exactly, exactly,
So,
and yeah, and aerial strikes do not necessarily, push a country into submission. It's an amazing thing, they, tried ever since World War II, and it just really amazingly doesn't work. You destroy a lot of property,
yep.
but you don't necessarily make the people. And with the Iranians, I think it might solidify them to an extent. Under a new regime, that might be good, but it's insane to be attacking Iran, and
It's
it
gonna
would
be a
be
mess.
insane to send American troops
Yeah.
to Iran.
So,
You know,
but no,
yeah.
that whole thing will be a mess because of the fact that you talk about regime change, and it takes a while. For anybody, look at Iraq. It took them a while before they finally got a handle on things over there, and then after we went in and,
Yeah.
destroyed everything. But here, let's get back to our one big beautiful
Sure.
bill
Sorry.
act, okay? And I'm noticing that the biggest, it's kind of funny, the Republicans are doing more to ignore that one little section, and what they want to try to concentrate on, is, well, we're not cutting Medicare enough. No, not Medicare. I'm sorry, Medicaid enough. They're not touching Medicare. Excuse me. They're not touching Medicare. They're not touching Social Security so far. Okay.
They're not touching. They're not touching the programs that of voters, of sure voters.
Yeah, yeah. They don't want to piss off all of us old folks, you want to talk about being grumpy.
You want grumpy?
We'll be real grumpy,
Yeah.
and all that. Yeah.
Millions of grumpy old men and women.
Well, the thing too is while they want to cut Medicaid and a variety of other programs out of it, you get down to it, it ain't going to be enough to support the huge tax cuts that they want to give to the billionaires out there,
Right.
and even some of those billionaires are sitting there going, how are you going to do this? And
Yeah.
you're talking about increasing the debt, and then to go to your discussion about Iran. Hey, my understanding is that there were several reasons why a bunch of people voted for Trump. Now, mind you, I think he won more because of the fact that more people sat on their hands, because they were
Right.
PO'd about some
Now, 3 million
little
people did
trivial.
not vote.
They were ticked off about some little issue, that was important to them. And I don't, there's some the issue is important, but I think it also still gets down to how does that affect the economy? How does that make it so
Right.
that people are working, people can afford a house, people can feed themselves, send their kids to school. To me, those are the important issues, out there.
Right.
And to ignore all those, makes me wonder. So,
Well,
so at any rate, the point of what I'm saying here is that they're looking at you take these tax cuts and then get us into a war. Which this is the other thing that a lot of people voted for Trump for, because he wasn't going to get us into a war. My
right.
neighbors, right next door to me, that was one of the reasons why they voted for Trump, was
Right.
because they didn't want to get into a war. They were all worried about going into a war, and now look what's going to happen. And by the way, do you remember who the last president was that did tax cuts and we were in a war?
Well, who was that? I'll let you answer that question.
Lyndon Johnson.
Lyndon Johnson. Yeah.
And
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 how well that worked out.
Yeah, we saw how that worked out. We
Yeah.
ended up into a big recession. During Nixon's in the latter half of Nixon's term. The early part of the '70s. Of course, we got hit with the gas wars. The fact that the Saudis and everybody decided to raise the price of oil on us,
Yeah.
and all that. Who knows if that could happen now again? And that you can imagine the
Right.
impact. What
Well,
hit will
they'll
take.
be uh, disrupting Iranian oil, though we're not buying it. They're selling it to other countries, and it will disrupting their supply. It still creates a problem. So prices would go up just naturally in terms of
Right.
supply and
Well,
demand.
yeah, and if we're still pumping out oil like we have been here, and we're exporting it, and that, and the thing is that the type of oil, I guess, apparently that we are pumping out of the ground is not necessarily conducive to making gasoline, where the
Right.
oil from Canada is. So, like for instance, the Midwest area here, where you and I live, we're really dependent upon that Canadian oil, and that because that's the stuff that we use to burn in our cars, and that,
Right.
and then the other thing that this bill does, it takes all of Biden's his bill to improve the economy. Okay,
In tanks.
yeah, and they're tanking it, and in particular everything for electric vehicles. I just read this morning in the newspaper that we have an overcapacity. China has an overcapacity of batteries. We've got more batteries than we know what to do with, and the market is starting to dive on electric vehicles because they're going to
Right.
take away the tax credit that people are using to buy those electric vehicles.
Right.
All right. So they also will no longer want to put charging stations out there. So the infrastructure that's needed, just like it has for gasoline-powered cars, is going to go away. Well, it's not
Right.
not going to go away, but it won't be as strong as it could be. And here's the thing,
Right.
too, that all of those factories that are building batteries here in the United States, people are going to become unemployed. Wow, imagine that.
Yeah.
So everything that his whole idea of bringing manufacturing here to the United States, you got it. We're building batteries left and
Well,
right.
and these people, the 2025 people had a social agenda. They have their prayer, they have their religion, and that is a major part of what they wanted to do. And the thing is that they had no idea And they wanted all the power in order to do that because they know they would have to have all the power in order to do that, but they don't understand how to keep things running in the meantime. And that's just going to piss a lot of people off.
Yep.
It doesn't take much to piss us off. And I think the hospital closures will come fast with the Medicaid cutbacks. That is a major thing in rural areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, all kinds of things in rural areas. And I got to say that it's really a failure of as a country to thoroughly educate the rural areas as to what they're getting and how they get it.
Yeah.
And how they can get more.
Yeah.
How they can get more by understanding government.
Right. So, to wrap things up,
Yeah.
because we've got we try to limit the show to a half an hour, every
we're
time,
good.
folks. So,
We're good.
so to wrap things up, you get down to it, this big, beautiful bill is not a big, beautiful bill. It's going to hurt us in more ways than we can count. And you add the tariffs, that he keeps going up, and it's here one time,
Right.
gone the next time, Mr.
Yeah.
Taco there, can't seem to make up his mind, but I love the way he put the line in there about how, well, I may, bomb Iran, I may not bomb Iran. I don't know. Hell, nobody knows what I'm going to do. Boy, isn't that the truth? That indecisiveness, the chaos that he's creating in the economy and in the business world. I used to own my own business. Believe me, I could not plan or run a business with all this chaos because I have no idea what's going to happen.
Right.
3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, a year from now. So how can you can't plan anything? You can't run a business that way. The business that I worked for, and that from last I heard, so far it's been like 80 people have been laid off. Okay, mostly because of the fact that the company gets the vast majority of its products from China. That 30% tariff that exists at this moment on there, that hurts. That alone
Yeah.
hurts. Him trying to put 180% and then coming back, Mr. Taco, going on. So basically, in a nutshell, to wrap all this up, this is not a good bill, folks. You really need to take a good look at this thing. It's going to hurt us in more ways than we can count. So, Tim, anything you want to add to that?
I concur with you entirely on this. So that kind of wraps it for this episode. I'm Tim Bagwell.
I'm Rich Garling, and we're
And
two
this has
grumpy
been
old
Two
men.
Grumpy Old Men.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.